Welcome to another episode from the Veterinary Research Channel. Have you ever noticed your dog gulping air while eating or drinking? This phenomenon, known as aerophagia, or the ingestion of air, is a functional disorder that affects the digestive system in both people and our canine companions. In humans, it's often considered a relatively minor issue, leading to things like burping and excessive gas, although in more serious cases, it can be associated with nausea, vomiting, and abdominal discomfort. Interestingly, in human medicine, aerophagia has also been linked to more severe conditions and can be a factor in gastroesophageal reflux disease and even aspiration, where food or liquid enters the airways, potentially leading to respiratory problems. In the veterinary world, aerophagia is frequently mentioned in connection with certain conditions in dogs, particularly brachycephalic obstructive airway syndrome, which affects breeds with short noses and flat faces, as well as conditions like sliding hiatal hernias and gastric dilatation. While videofluoroscopic swallow studies, a type of moving X-ray, are a standard way to evaluate swallowing function and can document aerophagia in dogs, many questions have remained unanswered. Specifically, the precise frequency of aerophagia in the general dog population presenting for various health concerns, the common clinical signs seen in these dogs, and any underlying or contributing factors have largely been unknown. Therefore, a recent study aimed to shed light on these important aspects of aerophagia in dogs. Researchers set out with three main goals. First, to determine how common aerophagia is in dogs undergoing these specialized swallow studies at two major veterinary teaching hospitals. Second, they wanted to compare the clinical signs observed in dogs who showed evidence of aerophagia with those who did not. And third, the study aimed to identify any associated health conditions or factors that might predispose dogs to this ingestion of air. The researchers hypothesized that aerophagia would be a relatively common finding, especially in dogs exhibiting a mix of respiratory and gastrointestinal symptoms, and that it might be linked to upper airway issues and an increased risk of aspiration. To conduct this investigation, the researchers retrospectively reviewed the records of 120 client-owned dogs that had undergone videofluoroscopic swallow studies. These dogs had been presented to the veterinary teaching hospitals at Auburn University and the University of Missouri for various reasons, including respiratory signs, gastrointestinal signs, or a combination of both. The researchers looked at the dogs' medical histories, the clinical signs they showed, and the findings from the swallow studies. During the videofluoroscopic swallow studies, dogs were observed eating in an upright position. The recordings were later reviewed by a single investigator experienced in interpreting these studies. Dogs were classified as having aerophagia if more than one-third of the food and liquid they swallowed contained air for the majority of their swallows, or if ingested air led to their stomach becoming more than one-third full of gas. The study's findings revealed that aerophagia was a common occurrence, affecting 40% of the dogs studied. Interestingly, dogs that presented with a combination of both gastrointestinal and respiratory clinical signs were significantly more likely to have aerophagia compared to dogs that only showed respiratory signs. In contrast, aerophagia was found to be significantly less common in dogs that presented with only gastrointestinal signs. The researchers also identified several factors that were more prevalent in dogs with aerophagia. Brachycephalic dogs, those with the characteristic short faces, were significantly more likely to exhibit aerophagia. Similarly, dogs diagnosed with upper airway obstructions that were not related to their brachycephalic features also showed a significantly higher incidence of aerophagia. Furthermore, the study found that dogs with aerophagia were more prone to pathologic penetration and aspiration, meaning that food or liquid was entering their airway to a concerning degree. Gagging was another clinical sign that was significantly more common in dogs with aerophagia. Through further statistical analysis, the researchers determined that brachycephalic conformation, the presence of non-brachycephalic upper airway obstruction, and having a mix of respiratory and gastrointestinal clinical signs were independent predictors of aerophagia. This means that even when considering other factors, these three elements significantly increase the likelihood of a dog having aerophagia. The study's discussion highlighted the high incidence of aerophagia in the studied population, emphasizing its relevance as a common finding in dogs undergoing videofluoroscopic swallow studies. The fact that brachycephalic dogs and those with other forms of upper airway obstruction were more predisposed to aerophagia underscores the connection between breathing difficulties and swallowing mechanics. The researchers suggested that the increased airway resistance in these dogs might lead to compensatory mechanisms, such as gasping after swallowing, which could contribute to the ingestion of air. They also noted that the timing of swallowing relative to the breathing cycle differs between dogs and humans, potentially making dogs more susceptible to aerophagia. Interestingly, unlike in human studies, this research did not find a significant association between aerophagia and gastroesophageal reflux disease in dogs. However, The researchers acknowledged that the methods used in the study might not have been sensitive enough to capture intermittent reflux episodes. The study's findings also revealed a link between aerophagia and an increased risk of pathologic penetration and aspiration. While dogs with aerophagia were not necessarily more likely to have a history of aspiration pneumonia, the increased occurrence of penetration and aspiration in this group suggests that aerophagia might be a sign of or contribute to difficulties in protecting the airway during swallowing. The researchers proposed that in dogs with upper airway obstructions, the altered pressures in the airway could increase the risk of aspirating oral contents. Additionally, reduced sensitivity in the larynx and pharynx in some dogs with upper airway issues could also play a role. The observation that mixed clinical signs were associated with a higher likelihood of aerophagia, while gastrointestinal signs alone were associated with a lower likelihood, likely reflects the strong connection between aerophagia and upper airway obstruction identified in the study. Some gastrointestinal signs, like gagging, although often indicative of swallowing difficulties, can also point to problems with airway protection. The researchers suggested that increased gas in the gastrointestinal tract, which can occur with mixed clinical signs, might also impact breathing and worsen existing respiratory issues. The researchers acknowledged several limitations of their study, including its retrospective nature, which meant that not all dogs underwent the same diagnostic tests. The relatively small number of dogs with specific conditions also limited some of the statistical analyses. Furthermore, the study lacked a healthy control group to directly compare the incidence of aerophagia. However, they referenced a recent study that did include a healthy control group and found no evidence of aerophagia in those dogs. In conclusion, this study provides valuable insights into the occurrence and characteristics of aerophagia in dogs undergoing videofluoroscopic swallow studies. The researchers found that aerophagia is a common finding in this population, particularly in dogs with brachycephalic features, upper airway obstructions, and a combination of respiratory and gastrointestinal clinical signs. The increased risk of pathologic penetration and aspiration in dogs with aerophagia highlights the potential clinical significance of this condition. The study underscores the importance of considering aerophagia in dogs presenting with these risk factors and clinical signs, as it may indicate underlying aerodigestive issues. Thank you for listening to the Veterinary Research Channel. A link for the referenced paper is in the video description. Remember to test your knowledge by answering the questions in the description, and as always, keep those minds inspired, hearts light, and tails wagging.